we are talking about power here. We're talking about the creative force of the universe. We're talking about the Christ descending down the tree of life. We all have the tree of life within us. So if you superimpose in your mind a tree of life here, then it's the Christ descends down and it assumes this primarily feminine form of the Kundalini. It's the power of Christ, but it's dormant, it's latent, but it's power. And it is that power that mechanical nature covets. And so this force, this energy, yes, it can flow up under the right circumstances, up the Shushumna canal. But equally, and far more likely, especially for this humanity, the tendency is for this force to flow down and out. So whereas here we can have an illuminated eye and an illuminated Trinity and the tongues of fire atop the apostles' heads and every halo about the head of every saint and every Buddha, or if the energy flows down and out, it synthesizes and it energizes what is known as the Kunda buffer organ, or the tail of Satan. This energy flowing up, we can say it flows up and Adam, or up and Adam, or up and at M. Up and Adam, up and Adam, up and Adam, recreating the primordial Adam. And then we have this other expression, down and out. These two expressions directly relate to what we're talking about here. This energy, this power, the creative force in the universe, energy will flow. And if it doesn't flow up an atom, it wants to flow down and out. It's not that it wants to do that, but the energy will flow, and it will flow wherever and however it's directed, because that creative power is the creative force behind the universe. It creates all of nature, both natures of nature, divine nature and mechanical nature, are both creations of that energy. And we know this to be true because through the act of sex, you can create another human being. That is, you can create an intellectual animal. If you have sex like an animal, you create another intellectual animal. You create another human-like machine. But that's using this power, this force. And when that energy flows down and out through the orgasm, then the most that you can hope to create is another human-like machine, a baby. However, because of what is conditioning that energy and what is causing that power to flow down and out is a mechanical algorithm known as lust. Lust desires the power, and it uses the orgasm as the temptation. It's the carrot that lust uses in order to feed on our sexual force, to get its hands on our power. It presents us with fantasies and scenarios and the desire itself, and that desire is for the orgasm, for the sensation, for the stimulation, in order for that metaphysical parasite, that aspect of mechanical nature, lust, run amok in us, in order to get its hands on our power, on our energy, which is the creative force in the universe. It's the most powerful force in the universe. And that is why in, again, Exodus, you have the scene where the Israelites are wandering in the desert and they are being bitten by these serpents. And these serpents are low to the ground and they're biting the heels of the Israelites. And Moses raises a serpent of bronze on his staff. Now, bronze is an alchemical union of two elements. So bronze is copper and tin. Copper is feminine and tin is masculine. And when Moses raises this serpent of bronze on his staff, the serpents that are biting the Israelites flee. They leave the Israelites alone. This, in that Bible story then, is allegorized the metaphysical science of sexual alchemy, of transmutation, of transmuting the sexual force, which wants to flow down and out mechanically through lust as the orgasm. Through sexual alchemy, through transmutation, we can raise that sexual energy up an atom. Through the union of feminine and masculine, we raise a serpent of bronze. And that saves us from the biting temptations of lust. So, in other words, this serpent always has two natures, to be or not to be. There are two natures to nature, divine nature and mechanical nature. The nature that seeks evolution in the supernal worlds, and the nature that seeks domination in the infernal worlds. In sex, we have a choice. It's really quite simple. If you have sex like an animal, you can create an intellectual animal. But if you have sex like the gods, you can create a god. Of course, before you create a god, you create a true human being, because practically speaking, sex, it does have a practical purpose of procreation, and you can create a true human being as opposed to an intellectual animal by practicing supersexuality. You can make a baby. It is a scientific fact, indisputable, that a woman can become pregnant during coitus without orgasm. Certainly the woman doesn't have to have an orgasm in order to become pregnant, but the man doesn't have to have an orgasm either. We've talked about this before, but it's well documented. Many children have been born because certainly without the man finishing inside the woman, and that's because in the seminal fluid which gets released during the act of coitus, there are sperm in there, and it only takes one sperm. It doesn't take a billion sperm to impregnate a woman. It takes one. So animal sexuality, infrasexuality, is completely 100% and totally unnecessary. It is superfluous to the existence of true human beings. And to those who say, well, but that's not practical, and this and that, and fertility and blah, 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 and this and that. Look, our cousin is a hardened Catholic, and her husband follow the Catholic Church's rules around birth control to the letter. They have something like 7 or 8 children. They use the pull-out method of birth control in accordance with the Catholic Church, which means they technically fornicate, but never inside the woman. And my cousin has given birth to 7 or 8 children. I've lost count. I think they've lost count. So those who say that Immaculate Conception is impractical and unreliable, etc., there are plenty of children who have been born this way. Look at all those single mothers and all those high school girls with unwanted pregnancies. There are plenty of people who become impregnated, despite the fact that the man ejaculates anywhere and everywhere except inside the woman. And yet there are still pregnancies. Benjamin says, that which is born of the flesh is flesh, and that which is born of the spirit is spirit. And Tiffany asks, why does the orgasm even exist then, if it hasn't value for an immaculate conception? Well, because animals require it. What drives animals to procreate is not immaculate conception. They're animals. They're innocent. They're not at the same level as we are supposed to be at. This humanity has fallen, so we've fallen closer to the level of animals, but that's not the level that we're supposed to be at. Immaculate conception or supra-sexuality would be meaningless, would be pointless without its inverse. Without temptation, there's nothing to overcome. Lust exists because lust is the mother of all desire. They need lust, the desire, the pull, the drive to procreate in animals is the primal instinct to procreate is lust. That's that program. It's the algorithm that's running in mechanical nature that drives animals to procreate. And it's mostly, not always, but mostly driven in the masculine aspect of the creative force. Certainly this is the case for mammals, but in other species, it's also there. Look at the social hierarchical structure of wolves, of lions, of monkeys, or other herding animals, where you have the alpha male, and the alpha male fights for the right to be at the top of the pyramid. Why? Because then he gets first pick of who to mate with. That's what alpha status is. It's mating privileges. So this is all lust playing itself out in mechanical nature. And certainly you can see that playing out in this humanity. These alpha male, these men that have like essentially harems, or, you know, any number of trophy girlfriends or mistresses, or, you know, trophy wives or whatever hanging on their arm, and they parade them out in public to show off their alpha male status, to show their virility, their sexual potency, their sexual power. Because remember, the power that people are after is this power. It's the sexual force. There's only one power in the universe, the power to create and destroy. And in the hands of mechanical nature, that's the power to control and to hoard, to gather to oneself and surround oneself with pretty things and pretty women and so on and so forth. But that's all on the level of mechanical nature. And the desire for stimulation on that level, on the sexual level, that's lust, that's the orgasm. Now Jennifer asks, aren't those two different things? Immaculate conception and the Catholic birth control method of pulling out. Wouldn't the woman need to be a virgin for true immaculate conception? No, because immaculate conception doesn't mean the woman didn't have sex. Immaculate conception means there was no fornication, which means also there was no, quote, pull-out method. There was no need to pull out ever, because there was no orgasm, because the man and the woman were practicing transmutation. They were practicing suprasexuality. The point of us bringing up the Catholic pull-out method of birth control was just to point out that physically, biologically, the orgasm inside of a woman is unnecessary to create a pregnancy, because the pull-out method of birth control is the most unreliable method of birth control there is, precisely because of what we are talking about here. And immaculate conception, this notion that Mary and Joseph didn't practice supersexuality, that they never had coitus, this is insanity. This is so what the Catholic Church teaches is incorrect information. It is information based on a dogma and a belief that wanted to make sex dirty in all its forms, and also that they did not understand the true meaning of immaculate. The word immaculate means clean, without blemish. That's what immaculate means. So immaculate conception is conception without orgasm. That's what it means. Yeah, no, of course the Catholic Church calls Mary a virgin, but that's not what virgin means. And virgin birth, it means a woman who has not fornicated. It doesn't mean a woman who has not had sex. It means a woman who has not fornicated. A virgin birth is, again, it's immaculate conception without blemish.